I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for the 16th episode of Esoteric Science Roundtable. The topic for this evening's discussion is the hierarchy. This is a live call-in show, and I will be taking calls at about 40 past the hour to discuss today's topic. To start, be ye perfect, therefore, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Seek first the kingdom, and all things will be added. Unto you is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. And these are just a few examples from the gospel. From the Gospels, there are actually many. Another one, be perfect, be of good comfort, be of one mind, live in peace, from Corinthians. These are all examples from the Gospels, the book that a lot of us are mostly familiar with here in the West, as far as descriptions of two things. A condition, first of all, being perfect, and secondly, the kingdom of heaven. And what is this kingdom? Now, some of the other names that have been used throughout history to describe the hierarchy would be the Ascended Masters, Christ and the Church Invisible, the White Lodge. They have different names depending. Also, the idea of a kingdom. What is a kingdom? The kingdom of heaven in particular. We know there are many different kingdoms in nature. We know that there's the mineral, the plant, the animal, the human, but there is also another human kingdom that is above the human kingdom, and that is the kingdom of heaven, the hierarchy of ascended masters, or Christ and the Church Invisible. Now, the idea that these men and women are masters needs to have some clarification. They are not masters of any one person or over any person. They are masters over conditions. They are masters over the physical plane. And they have free mobility and reign over the physical plane and other planes as well, because they have achieved a certain state of perfection, and they are able to work by virtue of the capability that they've achieved through this condition. And let's see, there's another saying also, that where I am, there ye may be also. And that's from John 14:3. And that indicates, again, that where I am indicates more a condition or a state rather than a location. And so the idea of there being a kingdom, so-called, and there being members in this kingdom that are perfect, relatively speaking, is something that many people might be familiar with and many people maybe not have heard of. Most people are at least somewhat familiar with these words that I borrowed from the gospel narratives, but they in their own lives have not sought to ask or to seek or to knock in their own lives to receive the benefits of these gifts. Now, this is something to keep in mind, that what we have in the gospel narratives and in many of the world's religions and many spiritual writings and inspired writings throughout the ages, we have basically a template or a guideline with which to use, to follow, and find our own return to divinity, and that we also, by following these steps, oftentimes referred to as initiation, which I've spoken about on a previous show. This process of initiation can be followed, and we can take the steps to perfect ourselves gradually, and speed up the process of evolution, so-called, in order to make ourselves fit to be workers with this kingdom. Now, people upon hearing of such a kingdom or a condition generally tend to have one of three reactions. They may ride the fence a bit and not really know exactly how to perceive the information. They may find it somewhat amusing, fanciful, or they may find some seed of possible truth within it, but they're not quite sure, and so they're going to, like I said, ride the fence and kind of not really make a firm decision one way or the other. Then there are those that firmly believe in the existence of the hierarchy, of the masters, and they have in their own lives been able to prove it, either through just analogy and understanding a bit more about the nature of creation and divine law, or by in some instances, personal contact with these great individuals that are called masters. Now, the third reaction to this information is going to be that this information is obviously from Satan, or it's blasphemous, or it's heretical. It's of a nature of a heresy to speak of these things as far as men becoming perfect, because in a lot of people's estimation, only perhaps Christ or very, very few would be considered throughout history to be what average man would consider perfect. But this is a condition that we can aspire to, that we can attain, and we can achieve. It's not one that we can attend to or attain in one lifetime. It takes varying accumulations of lifetimes for us to reach the point where we've set our feet firmly enough on the path of return to divinity so that we can make these steps through, again, the process of initiation, tests or trials, where we make ourselves more fit. We turn our attention away from our lower material self and the selfish interest of the average man to things of divinity, to things of the spirit, and we make that, again, that return to divinity. Many people, though, they can't think of the degree with which these men and women have sacrificed themselves to attain this state. This state is characterized by selfless service to one's fellow man, and that is the primary hindrance to the average man. His worldview and understanding prevent him or her from truly grasping, let alone from attempting to practice selfless service to humanity. Again, many people, they're rooted in their own material thinking and they're the center of their own universe, and so it's difficult for them to take a step away from that condition and to think about being more all-inclusive and how we can make ourselves fit to be members of this kingdom, gradually, step by step. The way is there. It's been demonstrated throughout history many times, and if we choose to make that return, we have plenty of examples by which to follow to make that return. Now, what are the members of the hierarchy doing as far as the work that they're allotted, and how does that activity come in line and how does our activity come in line with and under the influence of this group? Now, the masters have to, first and foremost, respect our free will. That is something very important to keep in mind. Any of the work that they do through humanity, with humanity, they have to keep firmly in mind the idea of free will, and they cannot, or they choose not to infringe on our free will. And so, by virtue of that, how do they influence mankind and work with mankind? Well, they influence them primarily those that are closest to the hierarchy, those that work intimately with the hierarchy, the senior initiates and disciples. Whatever work is the hierarchy is trying to accomplish, the different individual members, the work will be carried out through the graded ranks, through the various members of the hierarchy's different groups. And so, depending on what needs to be done, one of the masters will be assigned to the work, and he will formulate a way that he best deems it to carry forward and make the work successful. And so he'll use those that he knows are in the proper areas that he can influence and impress their minds with this plan that he's trying to instill, that he hopes to manifest into existence. And so there are different varying ranks of individuals throughout humanity that work with these masters in different capacities. And again, they're going to work with whoever's available at that particular time. By virtue of circumstances, they may not always be able to use the person that they would like to have used or the group that they would like to have used initially. Sometimes they have to change plans and make adjustments in order to carry these plans out and use whoever is available at that given time that they can depend upon to carry the work out in these different stages. And so they basically, again, they don't directly influence us. They influence us subtly, in a subtle manner, and we have the free will to choose and work with those plans. Once we are impressed with a plan or an idea, we have the option to work with or not. And so this is also how some of the great scientific discoveries and philosophical ideals, political ideals, what have you, different things throughout humanity that have changed our thinking have been influenced and impressed upon men's minds in this manner, that the pattern, the ideal, the archetype, if you will, is impressed upon maybe a scientist's mind, and then next thing you know, he'll be a discoverer of something new that will be very beneficial to all of humanity. Now, the best way, in my estimation, to understand some of this work is to actually read some writings that have been attributed to one of these masters, and to get his insight into what's going on with this so-called fifth kingdom in nature, the kingdom of heaven. And I would like to start by reading from some of these books that I have here from a woman named Alice A. Bailey. She worked intimately with one of these masters, and I'm going to first talk a bit about himself, and then follow it up a bit with some of the other masters and the work that they're doing. But initially, in 1919, Alice Bailey was contacted by this particular master, and if I could give you a bit of insight into him first, and then expand a bit on the work. The Master Jawal Kul, or the Master DK as he is frequently called, is another adept on the second ray of love wisdom. He is the latest of the adepts taking initiation, having taken the fifth initiation in 1875, and is therefore occupying the same body in which he took the initiation. Most of the other masters having taken the fifth initiation while occupying earlier vehicles. His body is not a young one, and he is a Tibetan. He is very devoted to the Master KH and occupies a little house not far distant from the larger one of the Master, and from his willingness to serve and to do anything that has to be done, he has been called the messenger of the Masters. He is profoundly learned and knows more about the rays and planetary hierarchies of the solar system than anyone else in the ranks of the Masters. He works with those who heal and cooperates unknown and unseen with the seekers after truth in the world's great laboratories, with all who definitely aim at the healing and solacing of the world, and with the great philanthropic world movements such as the Red Cross. He occupies himself with various pupils of different masters who can profit by his instruction, and within the last 10 years has relieved both the Master M and the Master KH of a good deal of their teaching work, taking over from them for certain stated times some of their pupils and disciples. He works largely too with certain groups of the Devas, of the others, who are the healing Devas, and who thus collaborate with him in the work of healing some of the physical ills of humanity. He it was who dictated a large part of that momentous book, The Secret Doctrine, and who showed H.P. Blavatsky many of the pictures and gave her much of the data that is to be found in her book. Now, to talk about the healing Devas a little bit, Deva is another word. It's a Hindu word for angel, in essence. And so he works with the angels, and those angels that are in charge of the healing work. And also, in the same sense that this Master Jawal Kul has worked with Alice Bailey to bring forth this teaching that's within the books under her name, Alice A. Bailey, he also worked initially to bring forth what is likely the greatest book, and definitely one of the greatest books that mankind has ever seen, and it's all of its history, and that is The Secret Doctrine. And it is a very profound, very in-depth book that breaks down esoteric science from the aspect of philosophy, religion, and science. And it is a crucial book that is basically laid the foundation for this field of knowledge as it was reintroduced in the West in the late 1800s. He who is known as DK is planning to restore via his students some of the old and occult methods of healing, and to demonstrate the place of the etheric body, the effect of pranic force, the opening up of etheric vision. My province in relation to the group is to give needed assistance to those who seek to fit themselves for active work as disciples. Suffice it that I am an Oriental, I am on the teaching ray, and closely associated with the Master KH. Part of my work is the steady search for aspirants of strong heart, fervent devotion, and trained minds. He whom you call the Master DK works much with those who heal with pure altruism. He occupies himself with those who are active in the laboratories of the world. Many of the healing angels, such as those referred to in the Bible, cooperate with him. The daily physical life of the Masters, of the Christ, and of those members of the hierarchy, initiated and accepted disciples who function in physical bodies, has had its orientation upon the subjective levels of life. The majority of them, and particularly the senior members of the hierarchy, do not as a rule intermingle largely with the public or walk the streets of our great cities. They work as I do from my retreat in the Himalayas, and from where I have influenced and helped far more people than I could possibly have reached had I walked daily in the midst of the noise and chaos of human affairs. I lead a normal and, I believe, useful life as a senior executive and a large lamasery, but my main work has lain elsewhere, widespread in the world of men. I reach this vast number of human beings
through the medium of the books which I have written, through the groups which I have started and impulsed, such as Men of Goodwill and the Triangles, and through my disciples who talk and spread the truth as I have tried to present it. On November 19th, 1919, I made my first contact with AAB, or Alice Bailey, much to her distress and dismay, and I have worked steadily with her ever since. The books which I then planned have been well nigh furnished. The various phases of the work which were part of the preparation for the reappearance of Christ have taken form and should go forward with gathering momentum during the next 20 years. The two major ideas which it is my task to bring to the attention of humanity everywhere throughout the world have been securely anchored, if I may be permitted to use such a term, and these constitute by far the most important aspect of the work which I have done. These formulated ideas are the announcement of the existence, hitherto unrecognized, of the new group of world servers. This is an effective group of workers intermediate between humanity and the spiritual hierarchy of the planet. The statement sent out lately in connection with the reappearance of Christ and for the immediate consolidation of the work of preparation. All else that I have done in the service of the hierarchy is of secondary importance to these statements of spiritual fact. Other work awaits me under the reorganization of all the hierarchical efforts incident to the reappearance of Christ and closer relationship which will then be established between humanity and the hierarchy. The production of the outer form on earth through the medium of books, of esoteric schools, and the educating of public opinion has been committed to a group of us who form a part of the inner world government, disciples and initiates. And to this group, I play the part of secretary and of organizing contact man, if I may use words which will mean something to your ears. This group to which I refer is composed of 2 Oriental initiates, of which I am one, and 5 Occidental initiates. I am an Oriental of the 4th root race, and although I have had 2 European incarnations, I still at times fail to grasp or understand the Occidental reaction. I receive my instructions from a joint committee of the spiritual leaders behind the world scene. They are the senior members of the hierarchy, working under Christ. They arrive at their decisions after due consultation with senior workers such as myself, masters and initiates above the 3rd initiation. And so hopefully that's given a bit of insight into this particular person, Joel Kuhl, the particular master whose duty it is and whose obligation it is to bring forth a lot of the esoteric teaching into our day and age. And if I could follow up a bit on a bit more on what actually it is to be a master and the condition known as a master. There are many groups and types of masters, and most of them are quite unknown to occult students, either from their own work or from rumor or from knowledge of the many evolutionary processes of which the human is only one. Not all the masters work in the 3 worlds. Not all the masters need or possess physical bodies. Not all the masters have their faces turned towards the realm of dark light, but many face for eons towards the clear, cold light of spiritual existence. Not all the masters make or are required to make the sacrifices which work for the 4th kingdom in nature entails. Forget not, there are many hierarchies, and the human hierarchy is but one. So that's something to keep in mind. There are different hierarchies, and not all are committed to the work of serving and salvaging our human race. From the esoteric angle, evolution means a steadily increasing sensitivity to light and illumination. A master may not possess all knowledge possible from the exoteric angle. This he does not need, because after evolution along the line of knowledge decided for him by his ray type, he is on the way of light, and the light which is in him and which he lives and moves and functions serves a dual purpose. It can be used to ascertain whatever is needed in the realm of knowledge by the revelation of where the needed information can be found. It can be used also to reveal to the master that which lies ahead of him and those further reaches of awareness to which he knows he must eventually attain. The master can build a body through which he can approach his incoming disciples and those who have not taken the higher initiations. He will normally build this body in semblance of the human form, doing so instantaneously and by an act of the will when required. The majority of the masters who are definitely working with humanity preserve the old body in which they took the 5th initiation. And so that's something to keep in mind too, that the masters generally when they do, if they were to be perceived by a person, a lot of times it would be an emanation of themselves. It would not be them actually. They work, again, behind the scenes, and they do impress the minds of those who they work with. And also, once you take a certain level of initiation, just in the same sense that Christ through Jesus was able to demonstrate in the gospel narratives. When Jesus the man was able to take a certain initiation at the transfiguration, at the resurrection, he also generated for himself a new body. And that energy that was released was captured on the the death cloth rather, that's the Shroud of Turin, and the face cloth called the Hilarion. And that energy has been reflected, and that process was captured on that cloth, and that's an example of what takes place. A master at a certain point generates for oneself their own body, usually similar to the one, again, that they took the fifth initiation in, with which to operate. And it is through this highly refined vehicle that they're more capable to be able to serve the race. It is in the new group of world servers that the training of the needed disciples for the ashrams of the masters takes place at this time in world history. This is a new hierarchical venture. In this group, also accepted disciples will learn to work in the same manner as does the hierarchy. The hierarchy works within the field of the world of human living. The new group provides a similar field for the new disciple. It is towards that group also that initiates in the various ashrams converge at times in order to study the caliber and quality of the disciples who are engaged in the world salvage. For it is through these disciples that the hierarchy carries out its plans. Initiates do their main work upon mental levels and from behind the scenes, and because of this their potency is great, and this is particularly so with those who have taken the third initiation. A certain percentage of them are, however, active out in the world of daily living. You need ever to remember that at this time the main technique of the hierarchy is that of conveying inspiration. The masters are not openly lecturing or teaching in the great cities of the world. They work entirely through their disciples and initiates. It will, however, be possible for them to appear increasingly among men and evoke recognition as the influence of Aquarius is more firmly established. The masters in the meantime must continue to work within the silence of the universal ashram, as it has been called, and from there they inspire their workers, and these later in their time and way inspire the new group of world servers. The masters are also subject to limitation. The general idea of all aspirants is that they represent those who have achieved freedom, have been liberated, and are therefore held by no limiting circumstances whatsoever. This is not true, though, speaking relatively, or so far as humanity is concerned. It is a fact that the limitations by which they were held as human beings are no longer present. But one achieved freedom only opens the door to another and wider freedom ahead, and the ring-past knot of our planetary life itself constitutes a powerful limitation. Speaking symbolically, somewhere in that great dividing wall of our planetary circumference, the master must find an exit and discover a door which will permit him to enter the way of the higher evolution in its more cosmic stages. And so the masters that do work with humanity, they do find themselves graduating, so to speak, into even higher work and in the broader context out into the further aspects of our system. Master has no personality at all. His divine nature is all that he has. The form through which he works, if he is working through and living in a physical vehicle at all, is a created image, the product of a focused will and the creative imagination. It is not the product of desire, as in the case of a human being. This is an important distinction and one which warrants careful thinking. Many masters and Chohans, after serving upon the planet in various capacities, work with the law of evolution and pass out of our planetary life altogether. A master can at any time find out anything on any possible subject without the slightest difficulty. Every expenditure of force on the part of a master or teacher is subjected to wise foresight and discrimination. Just as we do not put university professors to teach beginners, so the masters themselves work not individually with men until they have attained a certain stage of evolution and are ready to profit by their instruction. Who our teacher is depends on our grading. Similarity of vibration holds the secret. We are frequently told that when the demand is forceful enough, the teacher will appear. When we build in the right vibrations and attune ourselves to the right key, nothing can prevent our finding the master. 6 of the masters, as yet quite unknown to the average occult student by name, have already sought physical incarnation. 1 in India, another in England, 2 in North America, and 1 in Central Europe. whilst another has made a great sacrifice and taken a Russian body in the desire to act as a peace center in that distracted land. One lesson all aspirants need to learn, and to learn early, and that is that concentration upon the personality of the teacher, hoping for personal contact with him and constant visioning of that condition called accepted chelaship, serves to postpone that contact and delay the acceptance. And that's something good to touch upon here for a second too. If we are so concerned with the personality, which again these individuals have no personality so-called because they don't have any desire for the lower planes, for their earth life, that in the same sense that we do. So since they've achieved perfection, relatively speaking, that since they, again, without having any desire for the earth life, they don't need to really, they don't look for any praise or adoration or anything like that. They don't need that in their lives. They only seek to serve the race. And so that being the case, those people that concentrate their desires and what have you upon these individuals in that sense are demonstrating by that act that they are somewhat unworthy and not yet ready to take on the caliber of the greater work by virtue of being, distracted by the personality aspects. In all great movements, you have some thought or aggregation of thoughts cast into the minds of the so-called idealists by the Great White Brotherhood. It should be realized that through good character, high ethics, sound morality, and spiritual aspiration are basic and unalterable requirements, yet more is needed if the right to enter the Master's ashram is to be granted. And the term ashram just basically means a group. To be admitted to the privilege of being an outpost of his consciousness requires an unselfishness and a self-surrender for which few are prepared. To be drawn within his aura so that the disciple's aura forms an integral part of the group aura presupposes a purity which few can cultivate. To have the ear of the Master and to earn the right of contact with him at will necessitates a sensitiveness and a fine discrimination which few would care to purchase at the price. Yet a door stands wide open to all who care to come, and no earnest, sincere soul who meets the requirements ever receives a rebuff. And so the door is there if indeed we know the right way in which to make that return. Now, if I could follow a bit more on some of the work of some of the individual masters from another book we have here. This is a book called Initiation, Human and Solar, and this is also by Alice Bailey, and this does break down some of the work by some of the individual masters. Okay. Under the first great group, of which the Manu is the head, can be found two masters, the Master Jupiter and the Master Moria. Both of them have taken more than the fifth initiation, and the Master Jupiter, who is also the regent of India, is looked upon to by all the Lodge of Masters as the oldest among them. He dwells in the Nigeri hills in southern India, and is not one of the masters who usually takes pupils, for he numbers amongst his disciples initiates of high degree and quite a number of masters. In his hands are the reins of government for India, including a large part of the northern frontier, and to him is committed the arduous task of eventually guiding India out of her present chaos and unrest, and of welding her diverse peoples into an ultimate synthesis. The Master Moria, who is one of the best known of the Eastern adepts, and who numbers among his pupils a large number of Europeans and Americans, is a Rajput prince, and for many decades held an authoritative position in Indian affairs. He works in close cooperation with the Manu, and will himself eventually hold office as the Manu of the sixth root race. He dwells, as does his brother and the Master KH, at Shigatse in the Himalayas, and is a well-known figure to the inhabitants of that faraway village. He is a man of tall and commanding presence, dark hair and beard, and dark eyes, and might be considered stern were it not for the expression that lies in his eyes. He and his brother, the Master KH, work almost as a unit, and have done so for many centuries, and will on into the future, for the Master KH is in line for the office of World Teacher when the present holder of that office vacates it for higher work, and the sixth root race comes into being. The houses in which they both dwell are close together, and much of their time is spent in the closest association. As the Master M is upon the first ray, that of will or power, his work largely concerns itself with the carrying out of the plans of the present Manu. He acts as the inspirer of the statesmen of the world. He manipulates forces through the Maha Chohan that will bring about the conditions desired for the furthering of racial evolution. On the physical plane, those great national executives who have far vision and the international ideal are influenced by him, and with him cooperate certain of the great Devas of the mental plane, and 3 great groups of angels work with him on mental levels in connection with the lesser Devas who vitalize thought forms and thus keep alive the thought forms of the guides of the race for the benefit of the whole of humanity. The Master M has a large body of pupils under his instruction and works in connection with many organizations of an esoteric and occult kind, as well as through the politicians and statesmen of the world. And also, I've used the word occult many times today, and that's something to keep firmly in mind. Occult does not mean evil or bad or malignant or anything along those lines. Occult simply means hidden. That's all it means. When you trace it back to its root, it just means hidden. And so that's something to keep in mind. The Master Kuthumi, who is also very well known in the Occident and has many pupils everywhere, is of Kashmiri origin, though the family originally came from India. He is also an initiate of high degree and is upon the second or the love wisdom ray. He is a man of noble presence and a tall, though of rather slighter build than the Master M. He is of fair complexion with golden brown hair and beard, and the eyes of a wonderful deep blue, through which seem to pour the love and the wisdom of the ages. He has had a wide experience in education, having been originally educated at one of the British universities and speaks English fluently. His reading is wide and extensive, and all the current books and literature in various languages find their way to his study in the Himalayas. He concerns himself largely with the vitalizing of certain of the great philosophies and interests himself in a number of philanthropic agencies. At this particular time, the Master M, or Moria, and the Master KH, or Kuthumi, and the Master Jesus are interesting themselves closely with the work of unifying, as far as may be, Eastern and Western thought, so that the great religions of the East, with the later development of the Christian faith in all its many branches, may mutually benefit each other. Thus, eventually, it is hoped one great universal church may come into being. The Master Jesus, who is a focal point of the energy that flows through the various Christian churches, is at present living in a Syrian body and dwells in a certain part of the Holy Land. He travels much and passes considerable time in various parts of Europe. He works specially with masses more than with individuals, though he has gathered around him quite a numerous body of pupils. He is upon the 6th ray of devotion, or abstract idealism, and his pupils are frequently distinguished by that fanaticism and devotion which manifested in earlier Christian times among the martyrs. He himself is rather a martial figure, a disciplinarian, and a man of iron rule and will. He is tall and spare, with rather a long, thin face, black hair, pale complexion, and piercing blue eyes. His work at this time is exceedingly responsible, for to him is given the problem of steering the thought of the Occident out of its present state of unrest into the peaceful waters of certitude and knowledge, and of preparing the way in Europe and America for the eventual coming of the world teacher. He is well known in the Bible history, coming before us first as Joshua the son of Nun, appearing again in the time of Ezra as Jeshua, and taking the 3rd initiation, as related in the book of Zechariah, as Joshua, and in the gospel story. He is known for 2 great sacrifices, and that in which he handed over his body for the use of Christ, and for the great renunciation, which is the characteristic of the 4th initiation. As Apollonius of Tyana, he took the 5th initiation and became a master of the wisdom. From that time on, he stayed and worked with the Christian church, fostering the germ of true spiritual life, which is to be found amongst members of all sects and divisions, and neutralizing as far as possible the mistakes and errors of the churchmen and theologians. He is distinctively the great leader, the general, and the wise executive in church matters. He cooperates closely with the Christ, thus saving him much and acting as his intermediary wherever possible. No one so wisely knows as he the problems of the West, and no one is so closely in touch with the people who stand for all that is best in Christian teachings. And no one is so well aware of the need of the present moment. Certain great prelates of the Anglican and Catholic churches are wise agents of his. Let's see here. The master who concerns himself especially with the future development of racial affairs in Europe and with the mental outgrowth in America and Australia is the master Rahkoxi. He is a Hungarian and has a home in the Carpathian Mountains and was at one time a well-known figure at the Hungarian court. Reference to him can be found in old historical books, and he was particularly before the public eye when he was the Comte de Saint-Germain, and earlier still when he was both Roger Bacon and later Francis Bacon. And this gentleman in particular has done a tremendous amount of work through various esoteric organizations in Europe, as far as influencing them behind the scenes and also influencing the aristocracy and the affluent elite during those times. Certain people may be familiar with the legend of Saint Germain as a mysterious figure that came upon the scene and amazed everyone with his command of different languages and his varying knowledge, his wide and deep knowledge. And this is an example of one of the masters, so-called, and some of the work that he did in earlier incarnations. Let's see. It is interesting to note that as the Master R takes hold on the inner planes of affairs in Europe, his name as Francis Bacon is coming before the public eye in the Bacon-Shakespeare controversy. He is rather a small, spare man with pointed black beard and smooth black hair, and does not take as many pupils as do the masters previously mentioned. He is at present handling the majority of the third-rate pupils in the Occident in conjunction with the Master Hilarion. The Master R is upon the seventh ray, that of ceremonial magic or order, and he works largely through esoteric ritual and ceremonial, being vitally interested in the effects hitherto unrecognized of the ceremonial, of the Freemasons, of the various fraternities, and of the churches everywhere. He is called in the lodge usually the Count, and in America and Europe acts practically as the general manager for the carrying out of the plans of the executive council of the lodge. Certain of the masters form around the three great lords and inner group and meet in council with great frequency. On the fifth ray of concrete knowledge or science, we find the Master Hilarion, who in an earlier incarnation was Paul of Tarsus. He is occupying a Cretan body, but spends part of his time in Egypt. He it was who gave out to the world that occult treatise, Light on the Path, and his work is particularly interesting to the general public at this crisis, for he works with those who are developing the intuition and controls and transmutes the great movements that tend to strip the veil from the unseen. He is the energy which, through his disciples, is stimulating the psychical research groups everywhere, and he it was who initiated, through various pupils of his, the spiritualistic movement. He has under observation all those who are psychics of the higher order and assists in developing their power for the good of the group, and in connection with certain of the Devas of the astral plane. He works to open up to the seekers after truth that subjective world which lies behind the grossly material. Little can be given out anent the two English masters. Neither of them takes pupils in the same sense that the Master KH or the Master M take pupils. One of them, who resides in Great Britain, has in hand the definite guidance of the Anglo-Saxon race, and he works upon the plans for its future development and evolution. He is behind the labor movement throughout the world, transmitting and directing, and the present rising tide of democracy has his directing hand upon it. Out of the democratic unrest, out of the present turmoil and chaos, will arise a future world condition which will have for its keynote cooperation and not competition, distribution and not centralization. One other master may be here briefly mentioned, the Master Serapis, frequently called the Egyptian. He is a master upon the fourth ray, and the great art movements of the world, the evolution of music and that of painting and drama, receive from him an energizing impulse. At present, he is giving most of his time and attention to the work of the Deva, or angel evolution, until their agency helps to make possible the great revelation in the world of music and painting, which lies immediately ahead. More about him cannot be given out, nor his dwelling place be revealed. Let's see. The Master P works under the Master R in North America. He it is who has had much to do esoterically with the various mental sciences, such as Christian Science and New Thought, both of which are efforts put forth by the Lodge in an endeavor to teach men the reality of that which is not seen, and the power of the mind to create. This master occupies an Irish body, is on the fourth ray, and the place of his residence may not be revealed. Much of the work of the Master Serapis was taken over by him when the latter turned his attention to the Deva evolution. So please don't confuse the Master P that's a member of the hierarchy with the Master P as far as the rapper that has gained some notoriety recently. Let's see. Chris, if you wouldn't mind going to the diagram that we have, to the chart that we have, so I can go to that for a few minutes. This is a chart that breaks down some of the different offices of the different members of the hierarchy and how they tie in to the consciousness that we consider the will aspect of God, also called in the Bible the Ancient of Days, or the One Initiator, or also known as the One in whom we live and move and have our being. Now that consciousness is a consciousness indwelling the globe itself. These members of the hierarchy work in close conjunction with that personage. And again, I spoke briefly of the different rays upon which the masters find themselves to work. The different masters are going to be under a different ray, so-called. The different rays, if you think about rays emanating from white light through a prism, it breaks down into 7 distinct colors, or also in music, there are 7 notes, 7 distinct notes before the next note is the octave of the next level, the next octave. And so this differentiation of 7s that we see, these different rays so-called, we find that the different masters work on these different rays. Ray 1, the will aspect, would be the ray of legislation, governmental, the lawmaking. Ray 2 would be primarily concerned with religion and with education, and also, religion. Ray 3 would be concerned with education more so, Ray 2 would be more concerned with religion, and Ray 2 would be concerned with teaching to a certain degree. Actually, they do, Ray 2 and 3, I should say, they do share those functions somewhat to a certain degree, because Ray 3 being the ray of active intelligence, that does tie in as well. But you find listed here in the pattern here the different grades of masters and the work that they carry out. And just because one is higher than the other, it doesn't negate that the work that each is doing, they all are doing important work. It's just that they, through these different grades, just as humanity works itself out through different grades in our society, we somewhat emulate what takes place in the levels of the hierarchy with Christ and the Church Invisible and the work that they do. And you can see, again, below the hierarchy, you have what's listed as 4 grades of initiates, also various grades of disciples, and below that, it's not very visible on the screen, but people on the probationary path are those that have consciously set their feet onto the path of return to divinity and are making those steps to pledge themselves to that work and to work in closer commune and closer alignment with the hierarchy. And also then below that, you have average humanity who may or may not be aware of the hierarchy, who may have had some understanding of the hierarchy, or who may not be familiar with it at all. And so, again, these different members of the hierarchy, there being 7 branches of the hierarchy, so-called, that have different masters aligned with each for the different various work that they carry out into the world as far as impressing the minds of men. And again, that's how they differentiate and delineate the work, and that's how they split up the work between who's most qualified amongst their ranks to carry out this work. And that allows us some insight into how humanity works in conjunction with that group, with the hierarchy. And we can, as we set ourselves towards the path of return to divinity, we can make ourselves fit for this work, and we can eventually find that we ourselves will begin to make some sort of contact with either the workers that work with these members of the hierarchy, or ultimately with the members of the hierarchy themselves, and that we can help in our way to carry out the work. Now, there have been the way in which the hierarchy has worked. Again, they've impressed the minds of different men throughout time, but they've also worked to impress certain figures throughout history, mostly within the last 125 years, roughly speaking, since around 1875, thereabouts. You find that certain teachings have cropped up from different personalities, and amongst them, we could start with Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical movement that started in New York in 1875. Also, Alice A. Bailey, who started her organization in the early 20s. Rudolf Steiner, he was a German, excuse me, he was of Austrian descent, rather. He organized a group called the Anthroposophical Society. A woman named Dion Fortune, who was a British woman, started an organization called the Society of the Inner Light. And these are various individuals that have worked in close conjunction with these masters to found esoteric organizations for the bringing forward of this knowledge that they have to offer as far as the process of initiation, the relation of the kingdoms in nature to the kingdom of heaven, how we can work and cooperate with this pattern, and how we can mold our own lives after the examples set forth in the gospel narratives by Jesus through Christ and many of the world's religions, that we can follow that example. We have many, many examples of great individuals throughout history that have followed this example, and we too can also follow that example and work in conjunction with these masters and find a way that we can one day eventually become a part of this group, this hierarchy, even if it's initially within the lower ranks, and then we through many lifetimes of work can eventually accumulate a place where we can move forward and we can work, and we can work in conscious conjunction with this group. Chris, if you wouldn't mind putting up the phone number, maybe we can see if there's some folks out there that might have some comments as well on this subject. I've gotten a bit long-winded today, but there's quite a bit to talk about, and I haven't even really exhausted all of my resources that I have here. There is one thing that I'd like to touch upon briefly, and that is an idea of invocation. Prayer. I talked about prayer on a previous show, and invocation, and that is an idea of invoking or calling down. And one of the tools that we have at our disposal is a prayer. It's a world prayer that's called the Great Invocation, and I talked about it at some length previously. That prayer, the way the stanzas are broken down, it demonstrates the relation between humanity, the hierarchy, and the higher kingdoms in nature. In particular, the will aspect of God. And that prayer aligns those three kingdoms in nature, those three bodies in nature, and we can use this prayer to put ourselves into closer conjunction with this group and to make use of energy that's available. There's always exchange of energy between the planet, between the various kingdoms, and we can avail ourselves of this energy by use of this prayer. And I'd be more than happy to send anybody who's interested a copy of this prayer, the Great Invocation, absolutely free, no problem. If you can just when Chris leaves the contact number and email address later, if anybody's interested in contacting us, then we'll go ahead and send a copy of this to you, again, absolutely free of charge. And this, again, is a powerful tool that we can use in order to have an alignment, to link with these various kingdoms, with the hierarchy and humanity in particular, and how we can help them in the work. I'm going to go ahead and take a call and see what's going on this evening. Hello, caller.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, yourself?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, you had a little statement up there on TV that no religion is greater than truth.
Right.
And, I think people need to get back to truth. And I think if people just search out truth as far as they can reason it to be in their own minds, they'll do a lot as far as removing any delusion that religion has cast into their own mind, as far as perception of the afterlife, even communion with angels. These type of things, you believe in them if you choose.
Sure,
and
many people do.
Yeah, through your own imagination, you can create experiences that you believe happen. But in all truth, you don't know for sure if that really happened or whether or not it's a product of your own imagination.
That is very true. That's true.
And I think people run the risk of, they get into all these different areas thinking they're talking to angels, thinking they're getting points for heaven, thinking they're, whatever. They're building up karma for their next life. Like you even say, which I guess you believe, that while you're here on this earth, you're accumulating wisdom that you'll carry with you to the next life.
I do believe that, yes, that's true.
Now, me personally, I used to believe that. And I kind of came to believe just recently that that's just a product of my own imagination, that I don't know that to be true. And it tends to me to, as far as I'm concerned, if I reason it out in my own mind, I know a guy who had a stroke, and his whole personality changed, and his memory changed.
But
and
you
he
have to
just wasn't the person he used to be.
Well, that has to do because the brain changed, and that is your stereo receiver, so to speak, of your impulse from the will aspect of God. And so if that's altered or damaged, you're not going to essentially have the same personality that you did before, because you're not processing the way that you did before. You're processing differently. Stroke or any of those things like that would definitely cause that to change. But I would say, along with what you were talking about earlier, trust your intuition first and foremost. I mean, even the ideas that I'm bringing out on my show tend to be a bit controversial. I use some words that may not sit well with some certain people, and I have to run the risk of that and risk of alienating some people. But I have to stress, more so than anything else, trust your own intuition as far as if there's any deception on my part or self-delusion, if people are taking a little trip and they think they're communing with angels, like you said earlier, things along those lines, then people really have to weigh that out in their own minds, their own thinking, their own hearts, and trust their intuition first and foremost. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah, and it's easy to delude yourself if you're a willing participant in your, in your own belief, your own dogma. And,
Right.
and back to what I was saying, the guy who had the stroke.
Yes.
Okay, now his personality changed,
Mm-hmm.
his memory changed.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, if you had a full-blown dead brain, as when you die,
Mm-hmm.
your whole brain dies, all the neurons stop functioning, all the chemical reactions in your brain stop,
Mm-hmm.
what makes you think that you're going to carry any knowledge from this life on with your spirit?
Again, though, if you have a stereo receiver and you don't send a signal into it, if you don't send like a signal from a CD player, or if you don't tune in a radio station on the tuner on the stereo receiver, it's just sitting there putting out energy, or not putting out energy if you have the power off. It's the same concept. The physical brain doesn't store any information whatsoever. It's mind. Mind is a quality, it's a state, it's a condition that's outside of the physical brain, and so that's why we do accumulate in that portion of our being, the mental body, if you will. That's where our knowledge and our everything that we've accumulated from time to time accumulates and keeps itself.
But that's your belief.
That is indeed my belief, but...
I mean, I actually say that evidence says that is not stored in a spiritual brain or another dimension of a mind, that it is actually stored in the physical brain. All these memories that you say you have, because the guy I know who had the stroke, he forgets people's names that he's known
But again,
his whole life.
his stereo receiver is damaged. He has a left channel out or a right channel out, if you will.
He doesn't have the memory there to begin with.
Well, he doesn't have the way to access memory. Memory is there outside of his. All the things that took place in his life are there to be accessed. It's just that he doesn't have the proper utensil, if you will, the proper tool. It's damaged so that he cannot properly assimilate and transmit that information the way that he used to. And that's how it works when you get older too. Eventually your capacitors and the transistors start to wear out, and the connections start to wear themselves out in the receiver, if you'll follow my analogy, to where you're not able to tune in that signal as powerfully as you used to be, and so you lose information that you were once able to grasp easily. If you're an architect or something like that, and you have information that you can easily grasp because you're familiar with it, it's readily available. You access it often, and so you have that link set up. Once you get older, that link is not so cohesive, and you tend to forget more, and then Alzheimer's and those kind of things can kick in. But at my estimation is the physical brain, and esoteric science does generally does completely agree with me, that physical brain and mind are two separate entities. I have to let you go, caller, but because I have other calls, but thank you for your insight.
Okay.
Thanks. Hello, caller? Hello?
Yeah, my sister has talked about this for years through a... Is my TV too loud?
Yeah, go ahead. You're fine.
She's talked about this through years through the stereotypical, Jesus religion thing about moving into the hierarchy after this plane.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing how she has it figured out through typical religion. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Can we access that through any belief that we're under out here? I think she has, because of the manifestations of goodness that have happened in her life.
So you saw actually a demonstration in her life by her following this pattern?
Yeah, I mean, she was a...
I'm sorry? Sounds like I lost. Well, let's see. Caller, are you there? I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
Go ahead.
Am I still there? Am I still there?
Yeah, go ahead. I can barely hear you.
I was just saying, with all the blessings that have happened in her life since she's in tuned to this new frequency she got on, which was through stereotypical religion.
Right. I would say, to answer your question, I would say that you can find it through any of the great religions of the world. They're still here and available
But
for
she's
us.
been telling me for years, though, that she's moving into this hierarchy where she's going to grab people like the New World Order people by the nape of the neck and send them to the chasm of fire or wherever they're going.
Well, I can understand that symbolism to a certain degree. Ultimately, if you think about it, maybe if you haven't thought about it, I've talked about this on my show a few times, and I always try to hammer this point home. The methods used, it's like the Force. The methods are essentially the same, but those that you might want to call the New World Order gang or what have you, those behind the scenes that work with them, that influence them, the Black Lodge so-called, they use the same methods, they employ the same methods as Christ in the hierarchy. And so it's kind of a battle behind the scenes being waged for public opinion and what have you. But the motive is the key. The methods are basically the same. It's your motive, your thinking, your thought. And so if enough people are thinking in that respect as your sister is, then we can do that sort of work like she's talking about, behind the scenes, esoteric work.
And I'm wondering, I'm thinking, you know what, she is tied into this frequency because of the things that have happened and everything she said, what you've said tonight. You know what I mean? About the hierarchy and the masters. The only thing that's funny about it is you're doing it under esoteric science and she's under the stereotypical religion.
Right, and I think you can find it, again, through the different paths. There are different paths. Thank you for your call. Have a nice evening. Take care. Hello, caller?
Yeah, let me turn this down. Can you hear me?
Sure, go ahead.
I would say that we're actually de-evolving as a species.
Can you make this brief and explain why?
Well, we came from primordial sludge, we evolved up, and now we're, well, just look around, pal. I mean, you see death, you see killing.
But see, that's all this that's apparent and seeming around us. It seems like there's a lot of destruction is going on. The old ways have to be cleared out to make way for the new, and that's exactly what we're in the process of happening. That's what's in the process of happening now. Is a new impulse, a new astrological impulse or energy is coming in, the Aquarian energy, and that's changing things to where more group and more all-inclusive thinking is going to be available for mankind now. And so these old ways have to be brushed away and pushed away, and the path has to be made clear for new thinking. And so seeming death, seeming destruction, yes, there is death and destruction. That all is just a physical plane illusion, because in actuality, spirit is pushing and moving and manifesting itself. And just like when you get an illness, the disease has to appear on the surface. You know, you have to get the sores or what have you. You have the physical plane, the physical symptoms have to appear from the disease you get. It's the same thing. Those symptoms have to crop up into manifestation to where they're very apparent to us, and then we can deal with them there once they're on the surface. So once we see the problems, and they may discourage us a bit, we can still nonetheless see what they are and deal with them that way. But I have to let you go. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Hey,
Caller,
Corey,
go
how you
ahead.
doing, man?
Hello,
Hey,
caller.
Corey, how you doing tonight?
Good, yourself?
I'm good, man, and I'll keep it quick. Enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Cover a lot of topics that I'm interested in, some that I'm even unaware of. Did a lot of research, and I think you do a good job. Earlier, you touched on stroke and brain function and connection to the higher source and the higher power.
Yes.
I wanted to touch on two things: the connection that we all have to that, and also my experience with stroke.
Sure.
You touched on the differences between the left and a right brain stroke. My experiences with a right brain stroke, my mom had a pretty severe stroke about 19, 20 years ago. The caller that you were dealing with at that time was talking about how the individual was a completely changed person, like you didn't even recognize them, a completely different personality. My experience with that has been that it's with a right brain stroke, and again, that's where my experience lies. It's a severe personality amplification. My mom was always hyper intense and opinionated and loudmouthed, and she would always blurt stuff out. Well, now she does fine. Being a right brain stroke, she can still speak. So she has left arm, she has left side paralysis, but she can still speak fine. But her brain function is all revved up and freaked out because of the stroke. So
Paul, I have to let you go. We're running out of time.
One more second, then a quick one.
Go, please.
Bottom line is she's got some really innate psychic abilities that she had beforehand that are a lot more. Oh, shoot.
That's okay, caller. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That happens a lot. We're off the air.